Instructors, we have got to stop cutting our lesson horses in half by over tightening their girths and their cinches. And I get it, when they're over tightened, it's usually done out of love and caution and that desire to keep our students safe. And if you're like me, you've probably heard of or even personally witnessed those horror stories of what happens when the tack is not tight enough. That saddle slides, goes off to the side, student falls off, they get drug, and all the other fun that usually ensues with that situation. But something we don't talk about enough in our industry are the dangers and the negative impacts that come along with over tightening our girth and our cinches, and how those impact not just our students, but more importantly, our lesson horses. And those of you that teach in mostly Western tack and equipment or pad sets, please don't tune me out yet just because my demo horse here has a dressage saddle on, because the information I'm going to share with you applies across the board to the tack and equipment that we're going to be putting on our horses. So what we're going to be talking about is the importance of appropriate tightening of girths and cinches. We're going to talk about the dangers associated with over tightening and maybe some of those warning signs or extreme cases that can happen that I've actually personally experienced, and how over tightening has become a chronic problem in our industry, especially in adaptive riding settings. Don't worry, I am going to give you a super easy technique to implement that can solve this problem and help prevent over tightening of your girths and cinches on your wonderful equine coworkers. My name is Saber Popoli, and I'm the owner and founder of Hoof Falls and Footfalls. And through Hoof Falls and Footfalls, I am on a mission to help educate, equip, and encourage fellow adaptive, or also called therapeutic, horseback riding instructors around the globe. Now, during my time in the equine assisted services world, and specifically teaching adaptive or therapeutic horseback riding lessons, one thing that I constantly encounter personally or through observation of other instructors and programs is the cinch or the girth of that horse being over tightened. And this is a chronic problem that I see in our industry that has really dangerous outcomes for not only our horse, but our students. And I fully acknowledge the dangers that are associated with our tack and our equipment being too loose, but we have got to talk about the dangers associated with our tack and our equipment being too tight. And we should be, as instructors, we should be striving for appropriate tightness of our tack. Not too loose, not too tight, just right. That Goldilocks spot that we should be striving for, okay? And also a reminder that appropriate tightness of tack is not a one and done, because when we do that and we don't do constant checks and adjustments as needed to get to the appropriate tightness, then we run the risk of our tack and our equipment being too tight or too loose. So we've got to be striving for appropriate tightness as instructors, and also teaching that to the students and the volunteers that we are working with. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the dangers of over tightening and what you might see as an instructor if one of your lesson horses has too tight of a girth or a cinch. And I will actually share a story that I personally experienced as a newer instructor, and why over tightening girths and cinches has been one of my soapbox topics for several years, because I've experienced that dangerous outcome. So the most common things that you're probably going to see when your girth or cinch is too tight is that horse being girthy. So that's where they kind of pin their ears, they start getting nibbly, they might even turn back and bite your horse leader or bite the student or you if you're the one tightening it. So girthiness could be a result of that horse being over tightened in the past and now it's just a learned behavior, or it could be that you are the one, or whoever's tightening it, in that moment you are over tightening and that horse is not okay with it. So girthiness is probably one of the most common ones that you'll be seeing. Another common one is a lesson horse not wanting to move forward easily in lessons. So usually we'll see that going from a halt to a walk or walk to a trot. They get kind of sticky, they get resistance It could also be that with that being tight, they're uncomfortable, don't want to move forward, but they could also be having difficulty breathing. And even though they may not want to be moving forward and might be stuck at a halt or even, standing here in a grooming area, you might also notice that they're kind of wiggly and shifty because of that discomfort of the tack being too tight. And we're going to talk about a couple more severe symptoms and outcomes that can happen from over tightening our girths and our cinches that we usually don't talk about, or you may not even know about yet as an instructor. So over tightening our girths and our cinches can actually lead to temporary or even long-term nerve damage. There are several important nerves that run along the side and underside of our horse that will get compressed and can be damaged and pinched by our girths and our cinches. So we need to be really careful about that. And one of the more drastic outcomes, which personally happened to me, and I've actually seen it many times, is horses collapsing. So they just fall down to their knees. And it could be that they couldn't breathe well, could be that that nerve is getting pinched and tingly, could be a mix of those and that discomfort, and they just end up dropping down. Having been a horse person before I started out as an adaptive or therapeutic horseback riding instructor at a different program, I had seen the outcomes of tack and equipment being over tightened and horses falling down and collapsing, and also all the other, more minor things, I hate calling them minor, but minor things compared to collapsing, of the girthiness and the resistance to moving forward. So I had already seen what could happen when we over tighten our horses. So I was on the lookout for that. Well, as the newer instructor, I was still kind of getting my bearings of, how much can I push on the horses and their welfare, and those that were assigned to me in class, and also, having volunteers follow instructions because I was younger and newer and all that. So anyways, I had been warning about tack and equipment getting over tightened by instructors, but especially volunteers, like going behind instructors and actually tightening up more after the instructor had already done a girth check. So one of the evenings I was running a group lesson, so I had all my horses lined up. I go through and I do the tack and equipment checks. One of the horses, I had actually needed to loosen the girth a couple holes because it was way too tight. And I remember verbalizing, hey, I'm loosening this because it's too tight, leave it, it's okay. So finish my tack checks, start mounting students, and then that same horse comes in and they load, they're parked, and the student goes to get on the horse, and thank goodness that the student hadn't gotten on that horse yet, but we go to move to get on, and the horse collapses down in the ramp in between the offside block and the ramp. And you can just see the look of shock on the leader's face, the look of shock of volunteers. I was thankfully able to jump down and pop the girth loose enough, and then the horse scrambled back up, and we were able to resolve that situation. But what had happened is after I had loosened the girth to appropriate tightness, someone had thought it was too loose, and again, out of good intentions, they had tightened it back up and over tightened it and caused that horse to collapse in the ramp. And again, like I said, thank goodness the student wasn't on there. I've actually also seen this in a certification where the horse was over tightened, went to load, and almost went down because the tack check resulted into tight of tack. So anyways, enough on the horror stories of overly tightened tack. I do want to recognize, like I said multiple times, that there was a positive intention from the person who over tightened to keep the student safe, and it was what that they had personally been taught, was this is how tight it needs to be. With that situation happening, something had to change. So we eventually at that center implemented this super simple technique, which I'm going to share with you at the end. And it was night and day difference between the horses getting way over tightened and being grumpy and being comfortable and having their girth and cinch appropriately tightened. Okay. So I will share that with you at the end. Over tightening in our industry is something that has been a chronic problem for as long as I can remember as an instructor, and then also moving on as a mentor, doing a ton of volunteer training, training other instructors, and going and seeing and coaching other instructors and programs when I do consults and instructor clinics and certifications and all of that. In my experience, I have actually seen tack and equipment over tightened more than under tightened. So that's why I'm calling it a chronic problem. And how we got to this point, I think, is one, we don't talk about it enough. We talk about the horror stories of stuff being way too loose and, oh, you've got to tighten it, you've got to do all these tack checks. And I think a lot of people also associate tack checks with tightening your girth. That is not the case at all. You want to check the tightness, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to tighten it every single time. Again, we want it appropriately tighten, not just tighten because we're putting our hands on it. So one, we're not talking about it enough. And we're over talking about what can happen with loose tack and equipment. So then we overcompensate and we start to over tighten our tack and our equipment just in case, just to be safe, so that our tack and our equipment isn't too loose. And I've heard instructors several times say, well, I over tighten a little bit because I'd rather it be too tight than too loose. Or I'd rather be, on the safe side, or something along those lines. Well, depending on the horse, the tack, and the equipment, over tightening might actually be more dangerous than under tightening in that situation, okay? And another thing that comes into it too is that over tightening our girths and our cinches can also be rooted in just laziness, and it's the easy way, it's the fast way. I just want to put it on, tighten it, and go, and I don't want to have to worry about checking it later on during the lesson or while I'm riding, my students riding, whatever it is. So it could also be just a lazy way out of not being diligent about checking your tack and your equipment. So let's get to the super simple solution and the method that you can implement today, tomorrow, whenever you're watching this, if you want to help your lesson horses not get over tightened by you as the instructor, your students, or your volunteers. And this is a method that I implemented and put into play and trained thousands of people how to use, and I have personally seen the good benefits of it. And other instructors and programs that put this technique into play, they also say that, oh my gosh, it has solved this constant battle of over tightening the girths or the cinches. And some of that also comes from people not having a consistent feel of how strong or weak they are, especially when it comes to a Western cinch setup with your latigo wrapped around, because that is a pulley system and it multiplies your strength. Even on our English or dressage style girths, this roller helps kind of amplify your strength because there's not much friction there. So we do need to be careful with how strong we are. And the one hand method, which is my solution for this, is what I teach to instructors and students and volunteers. And basically what it is you take your hand and you are going to take the billet, and it should only, I'm going to counterweight a little bit, should only take one hand to gently tighten that girth. And if I need two hands to yank and pull that billet or that latigo up to the next hole, I am probably over tightening my horse in that moment. Okay, so one hand method. And that works for most of your instructors and volunteers, and yes, even our adaptive horseback riding students who might have different physical, cognitive, or emotional abilities. It works for most of them. Are there some exceptions to the rule? Yes, absolutely. It's not going to be a 100% fix. But the situations where the individual may not have strong enough hands to do this, we could maybe for them, move to a two-hand method because they need a little bit of extra strength and they really are not strong enough to do the one-hand method. But that is not the norm. Also, someone who might have arthritis in their hands and not be able to grip, this might need to be adjusted for them as well. Or someone that is shorter, so like our tiny little kiddos, where their chest and their head might be down by the girth. It can be harder to do the one-hand method when it's up more eye level or higher. So just a little note on that. So you could put them up on a little step stool, assuming your horse is schooled to it, or they teach you or their helper how to do the one-hand method until they get tall enough to do it themselves independently, okay? So the one-hand method, I know it sounds crazy, but it really does work, and it is a wonderful way to kind of equalize that pressure and that girthing method across the board for your instructors and your students and your volunteers. And with this one-hand method as well, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll loosen these ones so I can demonstrate. This also leads to a little bit smoother girthing. So instead of going up and just yanking it, this also helps us be a little softer. You do want to watch that when they do this one-hand method, they just don't yank and pull. We want to be soft and smooth as we're doing this method. But it really does help kind of reduce the jerking instead of using two hands and going up and on tippy toes and trying to over tighten, okay? All right, so I know the one hand method probably sounds crazy and you're like, no, there's no way that one hand is gonna get my tack and my equipment tight enough. It usually does. Yeah, there are those small outliers of where we might have to adjust. But like I said, this has worked for years, not only in my program, but several other programs with thousands of different people and many different abilities of students and volunteers. So give this method a try. Let me know what you think. Is it something that you've already done, you have already known about? Have you personally experienced the dangers of your girth or your cinch being over tightened, and what happened? I'd love to hear what happened and how that impacted you as an instructor. Or have you only been hearing the horror stories of tack and equipment being too loose, and that's kind of where you're coming from and you do overcompensate by over tightening? I'd love to hear from you. Post down below in the comments, because your comments and your discussion and your questions are how I know what videos to make next, because there's tons of topics I want to do, but I do prioritize the ones that you guys want to learn about and talk about and get more education on. Remember to like and subscribe and turn notifications on depending on whatever platform you're watching on or listening to, so that you get notified when I release the next episode of the Hoof Falls and Footfalls video or podcast. And please, 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 please feel free to share this information with other instructors or volunteers. If it is up on YouTube or a podcast, you are welcome to share it with everybody you know to get this information out there. So let's do our job as instructors to not over tighten our horses' girths and cinches, but have them appropriately tightened. And I'm sure your lesson horses will thank you very much.